Well, I'm pleased to introduce the next guest who's going to be talking about emotional connection in XR. Really fascinating stuff coming your way with the topic. Krause, thank you.
Thank you. Wow. So lovely to be here. I am so excited. I'm Krause here talking about emotion and connection and resilience in XR. And we're in the enterprise track and just sensing that it's important to talk about this topic and to get really intersectional about the way that we approach it. For me, I study wonder and awe for a living, so what a great area to focus on, wonder that lifts us out of ourselves and gives us a feeling of beyond. It's also really appropriate for AWE, that I've had so many awful moments in my life that have really inspired some of the direction going into VR, going into XR, and really focusing on ways to lose ourselves and ways to find ourselves. So I wanted to begin just by mentioning that maybe in this conference, you feel a little bit frenetic. How many people have been moving around the hallways and maybe today it starts to feel a little bit jarring to the senses, like you're moving through and things are all happening around you, a cacophony, and maybe you want it to feel more like this. Yeah, so part of what inspires me to world build and to create experiences in XR is to give that feeling. And I don't overestimate how much we've been through in the past few years. Really, it can feel like we've been through a storm. Just last month, which was also Mental Health Awareness Month in May, the US Surgeon General announced that there's an epidemic in the US of loneliness. And I think it's actually worldwide. So loneliness is a public health crisis. He said, "Our epidemic of isolation has been an underappreciated public health crisis that has harmed individual and societal health. Our relationships are a source of healing and well-being that are hidden in plain sight." So social connection is actually a healing method, and XR is a way to increase that healing. It's linked to a 50% drop in the risk of an early death. Studies show that 40% of wage earners currently feel isolated at their workplace. And people who feel a sense of belonging take 75% fewer sick days than those who are lonely. And that equates to $2.5 million of lost productivity each year per 10,000 workers. So here we are in the enterprise track, focused on connection, focused on social, focused on well-being. And I'm originally from Boston. I went back to the MFA last month and saw the Hokusoi exhibit, and I think this is a good metaphor for our time together today. So just thinking about this painting, it's one of the most famous Japanese paintings. It's called The Great Wave. And I just want to move a little bit farther into our group here, because as we think about The Great Wave, who's seen it in person? It's an amazing piece. It's one of the most famous pieces of art worldwide. And when you get up in front of it, some of the first thoughts you might have is, oh, it's so small, but so impactful. A piece of art that throughout history people have been looking at and taking inspiration from and thinking about in terms of our connection. So this great wave, if you look at it, you can see that the image actually relates to Mount Fuji, which is dwarfed by this giant wave. And there are 3 boats of people that are also riding the waves. So that metaphor of art and survival and hope, resilience. We're thinking about that today as we make some connections. Even in 2020, Junpei Mitsui, he spent 2 months, 400 hours, 50,000 Legos to create a replica of the Great Wave. And I think about that, and I think about the fact that Hokusoi was about 70 years old when he made this piece of art. And it's a sign for me of hope and transformation, and also a feeling as artists and community of us being able to come together and choose how we see the world differently, how we take these waves in our lives that could be difficult and turn them into possibility. So today, I just want to invite each of us to take a moment, think about our work in XR and the metaphor of waves and storms, maybe some things that we've been through, and connect with some of the metaphors that have to do with emotion and resilience. And as you're thinking about what waves bring to mind in your life, maybe some of your connections are similar to the ones that I came up with. We could spend hours on each of these anchors and have exercises together in communities in XR that focus on these themes. And that's what's beautiful about this surroundscape work of art, that we can take challenges and allow ourselves to fully immerse. When I'm leading exercises in XR, I usually start with a feel your feet exercise. So I also want to invite you right now, as we were talking about the frenetic nature of awe and being here at this conference, to just pause and ground and actually arrive here present in the room together. So if we could take a moment just to feel our feet, feel them against the floor. Maybe press one of your toes against the carpet and feel it pushing back. Can you actually give yourself a chance to arrive here and now in this room together? I wanted this talk to be more of an experience. This is how we feel things. We experience emotion. We experience connection. You're not just watching me. You're experiencing something right now. So if we take a breath and exhale and just feel our feet. It's a quick way to arrive and reconnect and be back here present together. And when I'm designing and creating an XR, the beautiful part is I get to invite my whole body to have the experience. We often think it's about putting on a headset, putting on some device, but it's our whole body that travels. So it really is a full top-to-toe connection. And that immersion, that wonder, people say that's why the mouth drops open when you have a headset on or when you have some device on, because you're so open to the experience. Spatial special. So it's not new that we as humans have loved to be surrounded by something that's wonderful. You know, back to these times of caves and people making cave paintings, back to the time of Monet, who designed right after World War I, designed the water lilies and thought, I need a room in l'Orangerie, this museum in Paris, that has walls that are shaped in a curve so that you can be surrounded by the art. And he wanted those water lilies to bring about a sense of peace and connection. So this room was designed so that people could be together. And designing an XR can be the same way. When you're looking for emotion and connection, I think a lot about how to bring humans together in a group where they start to share stories in a different way and feel immersed and surrounded by something that is beautiful and transcendent. I researched wonder and was doing interviews and all sorts of research. And at the book launch, what better place than to have a book launch in VR? So it's not about replicating our physical reality. It's about going somewhere that we have never dreamed of and have a beautiful experience with people from all over the world. Raise your hand if you were there. I think some people in this room were actually there in VR. And you have this feeling of being together and being co-present. How wonderful during a pandemic that you could have something like that happen. So this session is about emotional connection. And just to start with a check-in, 2 words for how you feel right now. If you could take a moment and just name, here at AWE, what are 2 words for how you're feeling right now? And maybe you want to turn to a neighbor. It could be someone you know, someone you haven't met yet, and just name those emotions. What do you feel right now? What are 2 words to name how you feel? We can take a moment. Yeah. So emotion is a language, and as you share with a partner how you feel, just check in with yourself. Do we usually give ourselves a lexicon for how we're feeling? How broad is that lexicon that we have to name our emotion? Julie Beck is a researcher who says that emotions break down into 4 different categories. I like to rhyme them. So they're usually mad, glad, sad, and the one that doesn't rhyme, fear, scared. And those 4 categories are usually driving us to make choices, how we perceive the world, how we act. But is that broad enough? There's all kinds of emotion research coming out right now that's affecting the way that we design XR worlds. And it's a huge part of our human experience in an age of AI. So I like to look at things like Robert Plutchnik's emotion wheel. I'll zoom in so people can see that. Different continuums of emotion and ways that you might see these emotions as something that speaks to you. This is in English, sometimes in different languages. Emotions have different meanings, so there are cultural elements that we could talk about. As humans, we really connect with emotion. And we use it as a way to reach others and to feel seen and heard. This is a picture I took of the Berlin Wall. How can we humanize the way that we team build, the way that we approach our enterprise customers, our teams, how we want to connect? This is a bunch of research. If you want to, we can go into more depth of conversation about each of these people and their research in the fields of emotion. Daniel Goleman, famous for emotional intelligence. We have Paul Ekman, who looked at voice and the facial expression to track emotion. Brene Brown did a meta-study where she discovered a lot of emotion is coming out in human storytelling. It's not so easy just to classify. And when Brene Brown wrote Atlas of the Heart a few years ago, she refused to translate it into different languages because she found that it wouldn't do justice to the integrity of other people's cultural histories with those emotions. We saw Plutchnik's emotion wheel. Dr. Keltner has done such great research about awe. His book, Awe, just came out this year. And his research with Alan Cohen divided emotion into 27 different categories. So we have a rich set of data and some new research that's coming out on emotion. And I like to study it and think about how we can apply it to, of course, what we're doing in workshops and what we're doing in groups, because when groups work together better and when leaders understand how to both identify and manage and use their emotions, then they're actually more influential, more connected, and there's more resilience and well-being. So a lot of these landscapes have deep impact for our business if we know how to meet and greet our emotions and think about the biology, behavior, and background of what led us to feel certain things. So ideally, today, we would be gathering and then going into XR and having these group experiences, and I'm inviting people to do that afterwards if you're interested in actually diving in and experiencing something firsthand. The data shows that having a high emotional intelligence or having some emotion quotient really plays a major impact on business, on well-being, on joy, and on our day-to-day ability to tap into awe and wonder. How many people love XR because we get to transcend ourselves in some way? Yeah, it's playing different characters. We get to be colorful. We get to go into childlike states sometimes. And we discover something new because the brain goes into this open liminal state where there's possibility that we hadn't discovered. So moving from that fixed mindset to growth mindset, as I was researching more about awe states, wonder, the brain, possibility, I discovered a lot of XR has to do with the hero's journey. So kind of similar to the typical Christopher Vogler or The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, but I decided it was more of a spiral shape because a person experiencing crossing into an unknown world, which is technically what we do anytime we use some kind of new technology, needs a mentor, goes through some kind of challenge, discovers something new, and then comes out, and I don't think it's home adventure home. I think it's home adventure and back to some higher plane of understanding. So in the workplace, we can use this as ways to educate, ways to increase knowledge, and ways to give people more sense of possibility, better freedom. If we're in a mental health crisis right now, this could be a way for people to connect with each other and then feel more animated on the other side of XR experiences. So I'm a strong advocate for not either or. I don't tell people, I want them to disappear into the metaverse. I like the idea of using some kind of flow, some new flow model. A lot of us are working from home. How can we use these dynamic models as ways to connect with distributed teams and give each other a feeling of distributed well-being and resilience? And speaking of resilience, we're lucky enough to be here. So if you're here and you're visiting from somewhere that's not local, I highly encourage you to go somewhere that involves redwoods. There are trees right around us that are amazing models of resilience. So I was at Muir Woods this past weekend. I'm not actually touching the tree, but it looks like I'm hugging it because I love these models in nature that give us that metaphor of co-sensing. So teams that can learn about resilience, what are some ways that they can practice understanding each other? And trees with their way of really communicating in different ways, and the mycelial networks. It's a really wonderful inspiration from nature of resilience. And this very short video is of me, or it's my view. When I was among the trees, it actually causes your body to look up. And when you start to look up, you experience that sense of awe and wonder and transcendence. So you don't have to force it, you just naturally put yourself in a state. And that's what I love about XR too. It just induces our body to have an experience without teaching us the lesson. It invites us to get curious. So all of these skills can be part of what we build in resilient spaces, in spaces in XR. These are examples of spaces where I've invited teams and groups from around the world to connect, to do different exercises with empathy and storytelling, to play, to use the overview effect. This was a team of architects, and they came back to their space with a different view, having seen the earth from on high. How many of us want to explore? This was a talk where I started on stage with a corporate group and I was giving them a talk, but then why stay on the stage? We could easily go into different atmospheres, even diving underwater and discovering, and moved our body state into a new frame of reference and understanding. And people start to have fun. They start to discover all of these words like states of flow. You can be in a flow state and be creative at the same time that you're exploring in XR. So there are lots of different ways to design the environments, especially for enterprise track where people have different roles and they want to understand how to work together better. So starting with emotion, starting with connection and team building is a natural way to have people trust each other more, co-reflect. So this was the reflection exercise at the end where we discovered that different people had different interpretations of what they were taking away and what was challenging. So it really is beautiful in XR to think about how originally when we might classify a metaverse as 3 S's of shared and spatial and social, it's actually a lot more. There are other S's that are part of the experience, which I've written about. So a challenge at the end of this quick session to think about how we're guiding the emotionally intelligent experiences, how we use immersion to fuel that connection and resilience, what we're taking away as humans, bringing this into XR, and maybe how to use storytelling, because we didn't have a chance to talk about it deeply today, but it's the art of the story that actually impacts somebody else. The story is the container for something that's emotionally meaningful. So if you tell me you're feeling happy, I might ask you, tell me a story about that. And let's codify that story in an object, and let's put that object as a memory palace in VR and have somebody else discover it. So part of what I'm really animated by is giving that opportunity, involving sketch tools, involving artistry, bringing that into the workplace, and letting people feel something that might involve a different level of sensory experience than they have otherwise. Because again, everything is reality as we believe it to be true, and XR allows us to use a new type of language for our emotions. Maybe an emotion could be a color. or a sound. So I have my reasons for definitely feeling like emotion and resilience are hand in hand with XR. This session today is an invitation to you to look at the internal and the external and see how they're connected, and maybe how these possibilities in XR allow us to make things revealed that we would normally conceal. And ultimately, leadership has come back to me saying that they've discovered how to be more human, how to forget that perfect offering and try to show something that would be more authentic. Maybe even some cracks that allow light to get in. And I love this quote because I think that's been part of the lesson for me. The looser I hold, the more I invite myself to get playful, the more I discover. So our takeaway from emotion and connection and resilience is that in XR, they're ideal for each other. That connection inside and out that people start to discover is emergent. And it comes from spending time together in XR. It comes from these invitational exercises. And it comes from shared storytelling. And there's so many opportunities that make it an ideal time to focus right now, as we have so many tools, so many AI modes that can help us be even more animated. The question is, how are we infusing our humanity? And then the third discovery for me is that the creativity can surpass the limits of the physical world. So we have an opportunity for immersion that uses wonder and flow and creativity and brings us to a better sense of connection. I love this moment right now because if we use our curiosity as a guide, then we start to break those barriers and do that with joy rather than force. It's an invitation over a prescription to see that connection and experience it together. And I think it's perfect, this timing, because it's kind of the crescendo of awe. It's AWE. We have a few more hours today, a day tomorrow to spend together. How are we emphasizing that connection and reaching out to others and remembering to appreciate this moment right now, which is the opportunity in midst of what can feel like a storm? So I think there are a few moments for questions. I just want to mention at the end that I also write a lot of poetry. I celebrate my own art. And this year I felt just inspired to produce a book of poetry called Digital Satori that's about the opportunity in this moment to express ourselves as creative humans in the age of AI. So this book just came out. I have a few copies if people also like poetry and want to talk about poetry and animation and AI and art. And right now I am happy to take some questions. I like to be connected and resilient as a community together. So if you're interested in building, please reach out to me, and thank you very much. Wow.
We have about 2 minutes for questions, so please, if you have a question, come on up to the front mic.
Great talk. I feel more relaxed, definitely.
I'm glad. Me too.
I guess my question is, if you can go into the VR, into the virtual world and experience all this wonder and feeling great and stuff, how does that translate back into the real physical world? And how do we avoid a situation where people just basically get dependent on the technology and they just want to spend all their time in there, and then we all end up like the Wall-E people on the in the Wall-E movie. Yeah.
I take the question seriously. I didn't mention it, but I teach a course at Stanford that I designed called Digital Wellbeing. And the subtitle of the course is Healthy Relationships with Technology. And it's a double meaning. It's the relationship we have with our tech. Like, how do you feel right now about your phone? Do you know where your phone is? Would you be upset if you didn't know where it is? I'm calling it a phone, but it's really, at this point, a computer. And the second meaning is the human-human relationship that we have mediated by tech. So I love the question. I don't know where you disappeared there you are. Okay. I like the question because some students even, at times I think, oh, is there certain addiction happening? Is it something where my behavior pattern is becoming a merge with the device? And I think that in my mind, it doesn't help to feel negatively toward myself and feel as if I have to police myself about use, as much as inviting myself to have a relationship with technology where at times I'll say, oh, how am I feeling? So when someone has an experience with awe and wonder and they take off a headset or they're coming back to their physical environment, how can they gently notice maybe a change in their mood, a change in their behavior? How can they notice how they wind down at night if they're having trouble sleeping? I'll invite people to just get really curious and investigate that for a while, and then play with different behavior patterns. And there are great people who have research on habit, research on how to use different places in your home, even your physical environment, the design strategy that lets us have a more mindful relationship.
Well, thank you, Caitlin. You can check out her book
Yeah.
at the back. Check that out and ask any questions in the back of the room, maybe.
Sure.
But let's give her a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you very much.